We are about to embark on a little journey because knowledge is power, and it's power all the time, but definitely when things happen in the world and we don't quite know what to make of it and where to listen and which book to pick up and which newsfeed to follow. So we probably would have done this course sometime during the year, but since we are in the midst of a war, then we figured that now is probably a good time to start. So the idea is really to have 5 sessions on 5 Wednesdays in a row. My idea was that we're going to do 3 in person, and because out of the 5, twice I'm going to be out of the country, then I thought that those 2 we're going to do on Zoom, but we maybe also do the one of the Thanksgiving. We'll talk about it in the end. We'll do logistics in the end. But the idea is really to meet 5 times for an hour and a half on Wednesdays. And if we'll feel that we need more, then we'll do more. But as a start, I think it's a good chunk of that. Couple of things about me, just so you have my credibility to talk about the topic, I guess. I don't have a PhD on the conflict, but I do have a lot of years of all kinds of different things. So I came to Israel when I was 8 years old. I was born in Moscow. And pretty much from my early childhood, my first memory of being an Israeli from the age of 8 is sitting in a bomb shelter when Saddam Hussein was bombarding Israel with Scuds. And the United States of America was bombarding the Scuds with Patriots, rockets. And I was sitting in a bomb shelter for 60 nights in a row, which was the first Gulf War. So that was me at the age of 8, which is the age of my kids nowadays. And pretty much every single year since, there was a different war with a different name, with a different neighbor. But throughout literally my entire upbringing and all the way till when I finished high school, which is the summer of 2000, I was 18 and a half years old. And in September 2000, the second Intifada broke out. You don't have to know what it means at this point. This is just background. And I spent my military service as I finished as an officer of the intelligence inside of Gaza Strip, but it got me, of course, a few stages together. But basically, I spent 3 years of the Second Intifada in my military service. So did all of my friends. I know Gaza, as they say in French, tête à tête, very, very, very closely on all fronts. And this is when the Israeli government and people and forces were inside of Gaza, not the reality that we knew months ago. And I grew up sort of on one hand with many, many, many different wars and suicide bombers and whatnot. On the other hand, I'm a child of the 90s. So I also grew up sort of in this concept of the Oslo Accords and peace treaties. But then there was an assassination of my prime minister. And then there were all kinds of other different attempts to reach peace. So it was like a complete roller coaster going between a war to negotiations to another war to maybe peace. And then in 2000, everything just utterly collapsed. And I was enlisted to the army. The slogan in the army when I was serving, that was 22 years ago or more, was that a good Arab is a dead Arab. And I never knew better. Growing up, I never met another Arab person in my life. Everybody I knew at the age of 18 were going to the army. I never knew anybody that turned 18 and did not serve in the army. It was just my upbringing. And because I didn't know any better, and there were rockets above my head all my army service. So I thought that reality is the only reality that exists and nothing else is really an alternative. And thank God I finished my army service 2003 and I moved to Jerusalem where I spent really all of my adult life. And I studied in music academy and in the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. In the music academy in Jerusalem, it's one building. It's one building with 5 floors with many different musical departments. And there was a department for Eastern music where 99% of the students were Arab students or Palestinian students with Israeli citizenship who will learn about the difference. And most of them were studying in this department, but there was one cafeteria for everybody. But whenever you would go into the cafeteria, you would know exactly who is who, because all the classical students and the jazz students who were the Jewish students were sitting on the 3/4 part of the cafeteria. And all the Arab students from the Eastern music department were sitting in the corner, and there was absolutely no interaction between them. And then I went to the campus of the Hebrew University, which is a big campus. It's the biggest campus in Israel. And there were about 50,000 students over there. But if I, as a student who is Jewish, just out of the army, Israeli, would walk the streets of the university and would see, for example, a student who is female and she wears a hijab, my natural instinct will say, cross over to the other side, because this is your enemy. And again, I never knew anything different, so there was no way for me to know. By the way, I have no recollections of studying anything related to this conflict in high school. I studied, of course, about the War of Independence and the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and all of that. But I always thought that it's kind of was the outside neighbors. I never was taught to understand that there is actually another people who is living in the same country that I am. And there are all kind of different groups of those people. None of that, or at least not that I remember. Maybe somebody taught, but I clearly was not listening or something like that. And then I truly remember when I was in my second year in university, and a friend of mine was having a birthday party. And it was Christmas Eve, which is nothing in Israel. So it was December 24th, and we were in a bar in Jerusalem. And I'm there with my roommate, and after a couple of hours, it was late, and we decided we want to go home. And suddenly two boys come into the bar. I was 22, So I knew one of the boys, he was a pianist actually from the music academy. And my roommate kind of wanted to get to know him. So I felt that I'm stuck and I don't know what to do with myself. I really want to go home, but the one that I knew had a friend. So we started talking, and we talked for 3 hours. And it was one of the most incredible conversations that I ever had in my life. After 3 hours, it was 2:00 in the morning. I'm telling my roommate, we really need to go home. She's like, okay, 5 minutes and we're leaving. And I realized that I have no idea what the name of this guy that I was just talking to. And before leaving, we decided to exchange names. So he's asking me, what's your name? I said, my name is Lana. What is your name? And he says, my name is Azar. Now, for the whole conversation, I heard a very heavy accent, but I was so enchanted by the conversation that for some reason I thought the accent is French. It was really, really silly of me because there was no French in the accent. But I again was, no, clear and whatever in the bar, and he's really nice, and we're talking. And then he said, my name is Azar. And I was like, your name is what? And he says, Azar. And then he adds the last name, Dakwar. And I literally remember physically how my jaw just went all the way to the floor, because I understood that the accent, it's not French. Mm-hmm. The accent is Arabic. And what do I know about people who speak Arabic? I don't meet them at the bar. So this information, that the sort of light bulb that I experienced at that moment, was really a life-changing moment in my life. I remember going home to the dorms. I couldn't fall asleep. And I waited so desperately so the night would be finished, so I can call someone and tell what just happened to me. So 6:00 in the morning, I'm calling my best friend, and I'm literally telling him, he's like, what? Like, why are you calling me? It's like, you wouldn't believe what just happened to me. I had the most incredible, intelligent, sophisticated, smart, interesting conversation I've ever had. And it was with an Arab person. It truly was a revelation, but that revelation really started me on a journey. And I remember the next day going to the library on Mount Scopus of the Hebrew University, picking up every single book that I could find about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and literally walking home down the hill with like a pile of books. And for the last 20 years, I've been studying, learning, changing, meeting people, and teaching about this topic to many, many hundreds, maybe thousands of people. Try to keep up a perspective. But it's always important also to say at the beginning that I'm very Jewish and very Zionist and very Israeli. And I can do the best of what I can to tell a story sort of from a central type perspective, not to lean anywhere. But in true reality, it's not possible, because until the day I die, I will be very Jewish, very Zionist, and very Israeli. So I'm going to try the best to bring in both perspectives, but of course, with a very, very biased identity of who I am. So first of all, any thoughts or questions about the very long exposition?
Do you recall any of that conversation, what the topics were?
Not to the details, but we talked about music and opera and university and just what?
Nothing too heavy.
Definitely not about, war or anything like that. That came after.
Did you see him again? And
Oh, yes, it was, yeah.
Are you friends with him today?
We're not friends per se. We're not friends. It was a very, very long story. We're not enemies either. We are not. He lives in Belgium for many, many years. We had we had a long friendships, huh?
He's trying to pick up that French accent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was actually born in Belgium because his dad is actually a very, very famous doctor in Israel. By the way, many, many, many medical personnel in Israel are Arabs, both doctors and nurses. We'll get to talk about that also. But anyway, it was a very, very long friendship. In the midst of which I lost my dad, and he was a very, very, very influential person in my life at that particular point to really scoop me up from the ground. And yeah, we stayed in touch for many, many years. And then he really just lives in a different country, and we didn't really keep in touch. Social media a little bit, but that person changed my life. That is 100%. Like that random meeting at the bar on Christmas Eve on my second year at university. I wouldn't be the person that I am today if I haven't met him. And it's just amazing to think that sometimes people come into our lives and they come with a reason. Sometimes it's for 5 minutes and sometimes it's for longer. But really, I truly believe that all the people that we meet in our lives, there's a purpose behind it. They serve a certain purpose and they change who we are. So Azan Dakor really changed who I am. And thanks to him, many, many things about me. The way they are, for better or worse. So I thought what I'm going to do, I call this course the void between the Zionist dream and the Palestinian dream, because this is my best understanding of what this conflict truly is about. It's about two narratives that are parallel. They are parallel. Since they're parallel, they're going in parallel lines, and there's almost no points of meeting, besides, of course, the essence of the conflict. So I would love to start digging with that a little bit and really just to open up with the question of what is this conflict about? So in order to do that, we'll try to do a little game. Those who were with me last night, I'm sorry for the repetition, but since I'm not technological and I find something I like, I repeat it. So everybody at home, please do that also. So grab your phone and you switch for a minute. Please go to menti.com. It's MENTI.com. Oh,
Great question.
MENTI.com. And when you go in there, it asks you for a code. All right, I'll read the code because it's small. So the code is 8884 2555. And the question is, it's a personal question. I mean, we'll see the answers in a minute, but for you, as you're answering it, yeah, I'll send it one third. But the question is personal. It's what you know and what you think. Okay. What is the conflict about? The code again is 8884 2555. 3 times 8, 4, and then 2, and 3 times 5. All right. So let's just have a collage of answers. What you think this conflict is about. I'll make them big. Oh, I need to share it so everybody could see. Okay.
8884 2555.
Okay, so we have some ideas. So the conflict is about power, land, religion, identity, freedom, autonomous rule, proxy battles, miscommunication, years of taught hatred, right to exist, self-determination, historical conflict, eliminating, self-determination, land rights, survival, hate, God, fear, autonomy, recognition, peoplehood, land ownership, historical, anti-Semitism, territory, Israel, water, hatred, killing Jews, ownership, Nagba, political power, right to exist, birthright, water, identity, and the three big ones is power, land, and religion. Good job, everybody. So let's just keep that in mind. If anybody want to take a picture before I shift. I'll go back to the presentation. Second. Okay. All right. So today we're gonna look at sort of the connection to the land. And
Share your screen on the Zoom.
I didn't share?
No.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I would not be able to do it without Sam. Okay, thank you. So everything that you said, and thank you. I would choose that we will, or I would suggest that we will start our journey with the land. And if that is our starting point.
Everything's fine. Feel free to keep going.
Okay. I know how to talk. This I don't know how to do. I really don't. So because I want to suggest that our starting point is the land. So let's explore a little bit about the sides to the land. And our connection is very, 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 very ancient. So I'm going to start with that, just so we'll go in chronological order. So for everybody that are home, you have the text on the screen. And now just read from a book. Okay.
Can you minimize the right side so we can
Yes.
see the whole thing? You can like move it.
I'm also going to read it.
Oh, it's not a touch screen.
Yeah. I don't think so. It's a touch.
Keep going, it's okay.
Okay.
Thank
I just knew where to look, but I don't.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll pick it up.
Beautiful. I'm in Genesis, the book of Genesis. We believe that in terms of putting it on a timeline, it's about 4,000 years ago. Okay, so like 2,000 years before the Common Era, 4,000 years before now. The book of Genesis, chapter 12, actually is my favorite portion that we read just a couple weeks ago. Lech Lecha, when God talks to Abraham and tells him, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. So on one hand, one can make an argument if Abraham is the main character of our people, of our tradition, of our history. But wait a minute, Abraham was not even born in the land of the conflict, in the land of Israel, right? He's from a different land. So in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, we learn for the first time about the story that there is this guy and there is this land, and then between them there is God. And God decides to connect the guy and the land. Only this is the thing. God decided to connect not only that specific person, Abraham, and his wife Sarah, and his nephew Lot, and the servants that came with him, with this dedicated land, but in this chapter and the following chapter, God is promising many promises to Abraham and Sarah. First promise is promising him that whoever's going to bless him will be blessed, and whoever's going to curse him will be cursed. The second promise that he makes, saying to him, is that you will be the father of a new nation. So all the people that will be born to you and Sarah, promising them that somebody will be born to that family, Isaac, soon to come, and all the generations that will be born to this couple, they in the future will form a nation, and that nation will be connected to the same God, and that nation and every single one of them will be blessed. And the third promise that God is making, is promising the land. And he says, go forth from the house of your father, from your land, from your homeland, and walk with me to this new land that I will show you. And this land will be your land. But again, not only yours, but of all the generations that will live after you, timelessly, for eternity. There is no limit to that. And here we are, 4,000 years later. And whether we believe that every single word that is written in this book is the word of God, or we want to argue with that, both of which, by the way, are absolutely fair, but most of the people of this nation that was formed, that we are part of, believe that the connection between the land that we call land of Israel and our people is one. And we based it on what is written in this book. Theologically, it's a very, very hard argument to argue, to say the opposite. Historically, archaeologically, a lot of findings that second what is written here in the chapters to come. And that is the most ancient testimony that we have on the foundation of the Jewish relationship to the land of Israel, 4,000 years ago. Go ahead.
But can it equally be said that that's the Arabs' claim as well?
We'll get to there in a minute. We're gonna sort of isolate the conversation of the narratives, just to try and sort of build a line. So we're starting with a Jewish line, and I promise you, you will not go home today before we will also draw the other line. And I'm saying it the other because we need to find words for the other line. It's not obvious, right? Next week, on our next session, we're all going to be on Zoom, because I'm going to be in Israel, but we will have a class at the same time, and we're all going to be on Zoom. We're going to look into maps, and we're going to look into many maps. But just sort of to have an idea, how shall I do this? I don't know. They will see it? They can see. Okay. So if this is the land, the state of Israel, notice the difference, but we're going to clarify that as we go ahead. This is the state of Israel of today. The boundaries of the state of Israel versus the boundaries of the land of Israel from the Bible are very, very, very big. There's a big gap. What I want to say by that is that the land that God promised Abraham and all of us is much larger than the state of Israel of today. And the simple reason is that if this is the country called Jordan, it did not exist 4,000 years ago. And if this is a country called Syria, it didn't exist 4,000 years ago. And if this is a country called Lebanon, it did not exist 4,000 years ago. And even a modern country down here that is called Egypt, it also did not exist 4,000 years ago. At least not the way we understand it today. So a lot of the areas of every single one of these modern countries of today were part of that biblical promised land of Israel of 4,000 years ago. How did we get from a lot of land 4,000 years ago to very, very little land today? We will learn. But this is just a concept to keep in our minds. Another concept that I want to add to that, and those who are home, you can look a little bit on this timeline, and I'm just going to show another one over here. We believe and understand that the Jewish people always lived in the land of Israel. They always start with Abraham. Okay? So the Jewish people for 4,000 years, they lived in the land of Israel, but in different numbers. Why in different numbers? Because we have a very, very long history. So we go from bottom up. So during the biblical time, the name of the land was Canaan. And then it was switched to be called the land of Israel. And here we are in the biblical time. And then we started having kings. And we had King David. And then we had his son, King Solomon. And under King Solomon, the Jewish people lived in the land of Israel very prosperously. And even there was a temple that was built in Jerusalem. Then the temple was destroyed. And the Jewish people over here were exiled to Babylon, Iraq of today. One of the first Jewish exiles outside of the land of Israel. There was also a group that went to Egypt. There was also a group that went to Persia. And these groups of Jewish people start building homes, rooting themselves in those countries. Then some of the Jewish people are coming back, rebuilding another temple, and then the Greeks are coming over. The Greeks were not good for our people. They tried to destroy everything that we built, the story of Hanukkah that we're approaching. And then after that, there was 100 years of Jewish independence, and the Jewish community grew because we were in charge. But that was the last time for 2,000 years until the modern times. And then we had the Romans that at first were kind of okay, but then they completely destroyed us and exiled most of us from the land of Israel, and we literally dispersed around the world. And then it was really 2,000 years of, do you know the word balagan? If not, this is a good time to learn it. Balagan means a complete, utter chaos. So there was 2,000 years of balagan. What do I mean by that? The Romans, who were pagans, and then they decided to become Christians, and they called themselves the Byzantines. And then the Islam was born in the world. And the land of Israel exchanged hands, it was conquered by the Muslims. But then the Christians in Europe couldn't stay back. So they are coming and they're conquering, and they were called the Crusades. And then the Muslims are conquering it from them. So our land exchanged hands all the time. Every 50, 100 years is exchange hands. And that affected the Jewish population. Most of these empires were not good for our people. And most of these empires kicked us out. So we truly believe that there was Jewish presence on the land throughout 4,000 years, ever since Abraham until today, but in very, very, very different numbers. And that brings us to the area of the last 150 years, more or less. It's a little bit more, but 150 is just a nice round number. That's why it's on the title of the course. But we really start around 860 to tell the story. And around 860, which is over here, we are sort of at the last segment of 400 years of the Ottoman rule of the land of Israel and more. It wasn't only the land of Israel, but to focus. In 1860, more or less, we start to tell the story. And what is going on during that time? Let's try to, first of all, questions on that? I want to do this really quickly because it's not a history class, but it needed to get us to where we're going. Go ahead.
How do you say Egypt wasn't around 4,000 years ago?
Egypt as a civilization was around,
Mhm.
but not as a country with the borders that we understand today. And there were parts of the Sinai Desert that were part of the land, biblical land, that was promised to Abraham. So the civilization called Egypt, with the Nile River,
Right.
and all of their, of course, treasures and so on.
Which goes to the Mediterranean,
Pardon?
goes to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes, but many countries go to the Mediterranean Sea. I'm
Okay.
talking about the gap between the modern borders and the biblical borders. The modern Egypt of today
Hmm.
is not as large as the civilization that Egypt once used to be. And there were areas of what is called Egypt today that were part of that promised land.
By the deltas,
Pardon?
where the Nile drains into the Mediterranean, by the deltas,
The area that is in the Sinai Desert, that is closer to where the state of Israel is today.
Okay.
I'll show you on the map. Yeah. The international border between what we call today state of Israel and state of Egypt was drawn in 1906. Okay, so and the map will help us. So here we are at the end of the 19th century. What's the situation? The Ottoman Empire is controlling for about 400 years, and it's starting to decline. Maybe you heard about the Crimea War, 1853, between the Turks and the Russians, that had a very, very massive effect on the Turks. They start declining, losing their powers. The land of Israel is far, far, far at the edge of the Turkish Empire. It's neglected. Nobody really wants to be there, but there are people living in that land. So who are the people? Here we are, 1860. Who lives in the land of Israel after 4,000 years of a big balagan? Who is there?
by Arabs.
Bedouins.
Let's start from the beginning. We're going in chronological order. So we are in the Jewish narrative, right? We're building the Jewish line. And we said that for 4,000 years, there were Jewish people living in the land of Israel. So who is living first and for all?
Jews.
The Jews. How many? Not many. Not many. Maybe the most a few thousands of Jewish people spread out all over. They're not in a good shape. And they're a very, 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 very small minority. So who is there next to them? Many different small groups. These other small groups came from all over. Again, the Turkish Empire is sitting there for 400 years. So they're Arab-speaking minorities. Language is very important if you want to understand this conflict. Arab-speaking minorities. Some of them are called Bedouins. Some of them are called Druze. Some of them are Muslims. Some of them are Christians. Some of them are just Arabs. Which word do you think I'm missing in my vocabulary? Palestinian. Hold that thought. So again, Arab-speaking minorities. If we combine them all together, they are the majority. Because we already established the fact that the Jews are very little. Okay? Let's talk about, we'll come back to this, hold on.
And then Rabbi, also there's a comment.
Yeah.
If you could repeat the questions people ask when they ask them so that the microphone will pick it up.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. I wanted to, okay, we'll do it by order. So this is more or less how it's looking. Although it's black and white, but is there anybody that haven't been in Israel? Have not been in Israel? Okay, so everybody else did. We're going immediately after the end of the war. I mean, I'm going on Saturday, but we are going immediately after.
The four of us.
Yes, make a plan.
I'll go when
I'm
Danny's
ready.
there.
What?
I'll go when Danny's there.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 1860. 95% of the land of Israel is desert. By the way, for all of you that have been there, somebody probably told you that almost every single tree that you saw anywhere in Israel is handmade. There's almost no natural vegetation in the land of Israel, almost none. So definitely in 1860, under the decline of the Turkish Empire,
It's plain desert. And the year, let's go up a little bit from 1860, we'll come back to 1860, is 1882. And a miracle happens in 1882. For the first time in 2000 years of Jewish history, small group of Jews from Eastern Europe come up with this crazy idea that there is a land in the far, far Middle East waiting for them to return to it. And several thousands of Jewish people are coming. At first they look like this, but very quickly they look like this. And they look like this, because it's so hot that it's not really pleasant to walk around like this. And plus, they really believed in this idea of building the land. You want to build something, you need to get your hands dirty. You cannot really do that looking like this. So they tried, and they got help, and they got their hands dirty, and they started working the land and so on. And this is the first, we can say, modern return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel after 2,000 years. Can you imagine? And still, even during those 10 years, between 1882 and 1903, the Jewish people are still a minority, only slightly bigger, but not by much. And then a couple of things start happening. One thing is this gentleman who was born in 1860, I'm sure you heard about him, he has a long name, Benjamin Zev Theodor Herzl. Oh, I have a mistake here, I apologize, I'll fix it, it's 60. He was born in 1860 in Budapest, Hungary. Anybody been? Yeah. Have anybody been to the big synagogue?
Yes.
The Dohani synagogue in Budapest? So Herzl was born in the same building of the Dohani synagogue to a very bourgeois, elitistic, assimilated, European, Austro-Hungarian Jewish family. He had his bar mitzvah at the Dohani synagogue. It says Jewish in his passport, but that was about it. It was not interesting to him. His primary language was German. He was a European Jew. He became an author. He became a journalist. And in fact, he really did not understand what is this concept of insisting on continuing being Jewish in Europe at the end of the 19th century. He also saw anti-Semitism and how nobody likes the Jews. And he actually believed that if we, the Jews, will stop being Jewish, then it will all stop and life will be better. To such an extent that he writes in his journal that he believes that every single Jewish mother needs to take their child to the nearby church and baptize them. And that will stop the Jewish problem. That's what he believed. We have writings of that. Until he got to be 33 years old. When he was 33 years old, he went to the bar. No, I'm just kidding. He went to the court as a journalist. And what was going on in the court? There was a trial. There was this gentleman who was a Jew in the Hungarian army, whose name was Dreyfus, in the French army, and it was in Paris. So he's sitting in Paris, and he's trying to write an article about this Jewish officer in the French army, and he really doesn't understand what this poor guy Dreyfus have done wrong. What's the story? And he goes there day after day after day after day, and he doesn't get it. Like, all of these charges that they're showing are ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. And then he goes, wait a minute. This guy is Jewish. Would it be that he's just persecuted with no reason? And then he goes, wait a minute, I am Jewish. But I believed so and so. Friends, after the Dreyfus affair, Herzl writes again in his journal, and he's saying the following: I was wrong. I was wrong. It doesn't matter what we will do. Even if we'll baptize all of our children, the world will still see us as Jews. It really doesn't matter. It's for life. So if we cannot beat them, then let's build who we are. And for the next 9 years, he unfortunately lived only 44 years. He was very sick and he died at the age of 44. But the next 9 years, he dedicated himself to a vision, to a dream that for everybody seemed completely crazy. He wrote 2 books to talk about this dream. The first one is called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. And the second one is called Alt Neuland, the old new land. And in these 2 utopical novels, he is describing this dream that he has when there will be a country where the Jewish people from all over the world will live everywhere that they are, and they will rush back to our historic God promise through Abraham to us land called the land of Israel, which is also known as Zion. It's one of the names in the Bible for the land of Israel. And therefore, in order to create this revolution, he creates a political movement that is called Zionism. And in 1897, he brings the leaders of the Jewish world from all the countries that he could gather into Basel, Switzerland, in what was known as the first Zionist Congress, where he shared those crazy ideas that he had about Jewish people living life wherever they are, rushing back to our historic homeland. Some of the sentences that were said and then written in his diary were, "In Basel, I founded the Jewish state." He was convinced in this reality. There was absolutely no other possibility of anything else. And therefore he said, look over here. He said, it will either take 5 years, but not more than 50. And there will be a Jewish state. He believed it so much that when he died in 1904, he wrote a will. And in this will, he said, when there will be a Jewish state in less than 50 years, you make sure that I will be buried there. There was not a question in his mind that that will be a reality. And therefore, another very famous quote of his is, if you will, it is not a fairy tale. People laughed at him. People wanted to admit him to a psychiatric hospital. They were sure that he lost his mind. But for him, he knew that there will be a Jewish state on the land of Israel, as if we know that there is moon at night and a sun shining in the morning. And this is a very, very important turning point. So I'm not going to go through it. I'm happy to share it to you afterwards. But the ideas, the core ideas of Zionism is Herzl's dream. Bringing back the entire Jewish world to our historic homeland, which is the land of Israel. There were other Zionist leaders that were not exactly like-minded, like Herzl. For example, Echad Ha'am, who was looking at this concept of Zionism from a cultural point of view. Some would even say that he was in opposition to Herzl. And he was really sort of pushing sometimes to different directions. And they had fights and arguments when they met together with everybody at Zionist Congress. And then there was the Mizrahi movement that wanted to push to a religious sort of viewpoint to make sure that we're building a religious country and not a cultural country. So there were all kind of many different interpretations of this concept of Zionism. But the goal, the end, the grand finale was the same one. Now I wanna pause there for a minute. This was our first line, okay? Let's pause there for a minute. Let's go to the other line. Remember the Arab-speaking minority groups? Okay, now we're gonna try and put ourselves in their shoes. All right, so here we are. We are living in this land for X number of years. Some for 5, some for 50, some for 500, some for 1,000, doesn't matter. We're living here. This is our home, and we don't know any other home. And we're living our lives, and we have a language, and we have customs, and we have traditions, and we have our food, and this is our home. And we speak Arabic and whatnot. And suddenly, one day, we start seeing boats coming up from the Mediterranean Sea with these strange people wearing suits and beautiful dresses, because most of them at that time are coming from Europe. And they're approaching closer to the shore, and they're stepping from the shore, and they look weird, not like us, and they speak a different language, not like us, and they're saying that they're coming home. Like literally, after 2,000 years, being dispersed around the world, they're knocking at the door of the land of Israel and saying, honey, I'm home. I'm not trying to be funny. This is the reality. So if I am this Arab-speaking minority, but I'm really a majority at that point, and I'm looking at these boats coming and coming and coming, and at the end of the 1930s, for the first 10 years, there were really a few. But after Herzl, the numbers start growing. And after the Kishinev pogrom in 1903, the numbers are growing. And essentially, if your ancestors, by the way, are from somewhere in Eastern Europe, then at that point in time, they were facing a crossroad of really making a decision. Do I stay or do I go? And if the answer was I go, then they needed to ask themselves another question and to make another decision, which is where to? If we're sitting in this room, then we know what they chose. But for example, my family and many other families chose differently. So there were all kinds of different options, right? But the vast majority, close to 3 million Jewish people left Eastern Europe at this climate, following everything that was happening. And they went to North America. And about 500,000 followed the crazy dream of Herzl, escaping the pogroms into this historic homeland called the land of Israel. And I am the Arab-speaking person who is seeing this. And then I see these people that are coming and they call themselves the Jews. They need a place to live. They need a place to work. They want schools. They want to build a life. And I feel like they're taking the rug under my feet. How is this fair? This is my home. They came from a different place that used to be home. They can go back to. That's how I view it. They can go back to wherever they came from. But what about me? I have nowhere to go. I am home. So what do I do with that? Question mark. Any thoughts or questions before we move on?
Weren't the Philistines there longer?
So we'll get to the name in just a minute. And as I said, if you want to understand this conflict, words are important. And that's why I still keep saying Arab-speaking minorities. And we'll get to the name in just a minute.
So the question was for the microphone, weren't the Philistines there earlier? So
Yeah, we're getting to the name. So, okay.
And doesn't Abraham's other son also have an even earlier, perhaps, claim or entitlement?
Beautiful. So the comment is that Abraham, I'll rephrase it a little bit, had 2 sons. The firstborn was Ishmael, who he had with Hagar. although he pushed them to the desert and did not really took care of their needs, but he was the firstborn. The second born was Isaac, that had Jacob, who had 12 sons, and here we are. The continuation of that side. All right, so very valid comment. We'll get back to it. Ari Shavit is the Israeli. Question?
No,
No,
That's okay.
not a question. Okay. People at home, if you have questions or comments, it will be awesome if you can write them in the chat, and then Sam will bring it to us. Ari Shavit is an Israeli journalist. Up until a few years ago, used to have a daily column in Haaretz, which is sort of a center or left of center daily newspaper in Israel that you can also find in English. Then he wrote this book in English. This book was never translated to Hebrew. It's called My Promised Land. Then he got some trouble, and he resigned and was kind of out of the loop for a little bit. Now he's coming back, and he wrote actually an excellent book, similar but speaking Israeli language in Hebrew. Personally, I believe that it's one of the most important books that were written in the last 20 years
This one?
in English about the state of Israel. It really is about the modern state of Israel. It's written in such a way that it has a chapter about every valid and important topic about the Israeli society. And if you want, you can borrow from my office. I think we have another copy in the library, and Amazon is always available. What I love about this book the most is the introduction. And this is why. Ari Shavit's grandfather is coming to Israel at the end of the 19th century. But unlike all of these people that I was talking about before, he's not coming from Eastern Europe. He is not escaping any pogrom. And Zionism is nice, but in 1897, it was just the beginning, so it wasn't really a thing. In fact, he's coming to the land of Israel in 1897, before the first Zionist Congress. And then he goes to Europe, he is meeting Herzl, and he's telling Herzl, he's like, does a report of everything that he saw on that land. And he was very, very high up in the British sort of society. He was a lord, very respected, had a very good life, and again, was not escaping anything or anyone. But yet, he's coming. And in the introduction, he's describing a little bit of this coming. So I want to share a few paragraphs with you here. Okay. Okay. And what I wrote here above the book is a notion that was sort of installed in the minds of the Jewish people that were on their way to our historic homeland. And the notion that was installed largely by the Zionist movement and its leaders was land of Israel is a land without people. And we are people without a land. And I'll say this again because this is really important. The land of Israel is a land without people. And we are people without a land. And actually, before I'll read to you one paragraph, I want to say another something. Not only that in the 19th century, where the Jewish people are getting off the boats to the shores of Jaffa and seeing people that were not waving and saying, hi, welcome. So not only that the land was not empty at the end of the 19th century, but I actually want to make a claim and emphasize that the land of Israel was never empty. Never. This concept of the promised biblical land, the land of milk and honey, it's really nice and mythological and beautiful, but it's not the truth. And in fact, if you read the Bible, which is an amazing history book, whether you believe it's the word of God or not, I couldn't care less, but it's an amazing history book. Amazing history book. Everything is there. It's also a very wise book, but that's for a different class. It's an amazing history book. And it tells us in details about numerous wars of our people for their rights, supposedly, to dwell on that land. From the beginning of times, starting with Abraham, going through where our people finally, after the Exodus, crossed the Jordan River, led by Joshua, entered the land of Israel. The whole book of Joshua is telling us about one war after the other, with the local biblical people that were living in the land. Some of them were called the Philistines. So we're talking about thousands of years of conflict, not only 150. So this is something really, really, really important to keep in mind, that the land was never empty. It really just was never empty. I do believe in the second part of the sentence, by the way. I do believe that we were, up until 150 years ago, people who were dispersed around the world and did not have a land. But I want to debate together about the first part. This is what Ari Shavit's grandfather writes when he comes to the land of Israel in 1897. He sees the quiet, the emptiness, he sees the promise. Here is the stage upon which the drama will play out. All that was and all that shall be. The carpets of wildflowers, the groves of ancient olive trees, the light purple silhouette of the Judean hills. And over there, Jerusalem. By pure chance, my great-grandfather is an epicenter of that drama. And at this juncture, a choice must be made. This way or the other. Move forward or pull back. Choose Palestine or reject it. My great-grandfather is not really fit to make such a decision. He does not see the land as it is. Riding the elegant carriage from Jaffa to Mikveh Israel, he did not see the Palestinian village of Abu Kabir. Traveling from Mikveh Israel to Rishon LeZion, he did not see the Palestinian village of Yazur. On his way to Rishon LeZion to Ramle, he did not see the Palestinian village of Sarafand. And in Ramle, he does not really see that Ramle is a Palestinian town. And now, standing atop the white tower, he does not see the nearby Palestinian town of Lod. He does not see the Palestinian village of Haditha, the Palestinian village of Gimzu, or the Palestinian village of El-Kubab. My great-grandfather does not see on the shoulder of Mount Gezer the Palestinian village of Abu Shusha. There are more than 500,000 Arabs. This is 1897, okay? He says, more than 500,000 Arabs, Bedouins, and Druze in Palestine of 1897. There are 20 cities and towns and hundreds of villages. So how can my grandfather not notice them? How can he not see from the tower of Ramle that the land is taken? That there is another people now occupying the land of his ancestors. Thoughts, questions, remarks?
You started using the word Palestine, so how?
Yes,
does
we're
that-
getting there. We're getting there.
Not
Yeah.
there yet, even though we.
No, we are getting there.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know.
Oh, sorry, Bobby. The question was that the book, is referring to the land of Israel as Palestine. And we did not talk about it yet, but we're going there now. Go ahead, Bobby.
I don't know what to
Make out of this.
I mean, it's not the first time I've
Yeah.
heard.
Where are you going?
Something like that, but. That's kind of the nut in my head about all of this.
You're in the right place. We're gonna try to unnut it. That's a word, maybe not, but you understood what I mean. All right, what else? Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we came here to do.
Well, the obvious point is there are now 9 million in the land of Israel. Well, not including the West Bank where there are 2 million Arabs, but there are 9 million in the 48 border. And so if you go from 500,000 Arabs, 9 million, there's a lot of space remaining. And the Yishuv sold a lot of this land to the Jews coming in from Europe.
Beautiful. We're gonna talk about the numbers. We're gonna talk about the numbers. At this point, we're still at the end of the 19th century. And the reality is that at the end of the 19th century, in the land of Israel, there are 500,000 Arab-speaking minority groups. And at this point, probably around 50,000 Jews. Okay? And the numbers, of course, will continue to change. Now, you clearly understand that I need a lot of courage to start a class on the first day to read what I read to you right now. But I also believe that if we're learning, then we need to learn and not to swipe anything under the table. So this is a very, very important part of the equation. I'm not going to leave you linger, not to worry.
And one quick, do the Philistines become the Palestinians?
Here we're coming to this. We're coming to the name. I know it's a lot of in suspense. We're coming to the name. Yeah.
I just want to say that I so appreciate how you're being clear and methodical about doing this. I've been learning all of this stuff for my whole life, and yet it's still so complicated.
Also for
And
me.
so, and yeah, so I'm just saying, for whatever it's worth, I just like how we're just one moment at a time.
Takes a lot of patience. I know, I'm aware of that, but I promise
like
you.
that it's going this.
Thank you. I'm not gonna send you home linger. We will cover the name today, I promise, soon, because I also need to go home. Wait, we have,
We have two questions.
two
from
questions from the audience at home.
that. Yes.
Hi, everyone.
One of them was from the last question time, but it seems that the Ottomans were in charge of both minorities. What did they think? My understanding was that they were happy to sell land to the Jews.
Beautiful. So you all heard the question, I interpret. So the Ottoman Empire, for the 400 years that it was in the land of Israel, it shifted. At this point, when it's in a complete decline, one of the major sort of points of the decline was financial, economical. So starting with 1860, that's why I keep referring to that date, there is a window of opportunities. And that window of opportunities is that the Ottoman Empire needs money, and therefore it's selling land to the highest bidder. Why I keep referring to 1860? Because in 1860, European countries start coming to the land of Israel, paying money to the Ottoman Empire and build colonies. For those of you who've been to Jerusalem or you've been to Haifa, Jerusalem is all international. We have neighborhoods like the German colony, the Italian hospital, the American colony, the Austrian hospice, the Scottish house, and so on and so forth. What is that? That's a result of the Ottoman decline in the end of the 19th century. And when the Jewish people that first come because they want to, and then pumped by Zionism and escaping pogroms and so on and so forth, they see this reality and they understand, okay, there's a potential there. And they also want their way into this window of opportunities. So the people that are coming are putting all of their coins, whatever the currency was in different countries, together, and they come very often as communities in order to combine the money that they have so they could buy the land and settle down 100%. The other piece is how they, who are they siding, if we can sort of pose the question like that. The Ottomans were Muslims. So it's not gonna be a surprise for anybody that first and for all decided was the Muslims. Does it mean that all the Arab speakers were Muslims? It doesn't mean that. But first and for all, they were siding with the Muslims. But I will say that if we look at this very long history that I did in 2.5 minutes, and we said that the Jewish people always lived in the land of Israel, but in different numbers because of the disposition and whatever was going on, the Ottoman Empire was kind of good towards a very, very small Jewish minority because they didn't bother them and they were kind of busy doing their own thing. So there was no real hostility. It's not like the Jewish people under the Ottoman rule could be free to do whatever they want, but they were also not really persecuted. They could live their life and maintain their daily traditions and be Jewish under the Ottoman rule. But first and for all, they sided with the Muslims. Let's take a few steps forward. I will, another one? Yeah,
There was another, another question.
Yeah.
How many Christians were there in the land at that time?
Beautiful. So out of the 500,000 Arab-speaking minorities, the smallest minority was Christian. We're talking about something very, 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 very small. Generally speaking, Christianity in the Middle East is a minority within a minority. Even in the state of Israel of today, Christians are less than 2%. So we're talking about something very, very small, a few thousands, not more than that, in the end of the 19th century, okay? I will say something briefly, and then I'm gonna jump to the name, okay? Because I wanna respect our timeline. Zionism was founded as a political movement, and that political movement can be exchanged with another word that we know, and that is nationalism. And after the French Revolution, which occurred about a century earlier, and allowed emancipation on one side, but also allowed the sentiment of nationalism in the world, and specifically in Europe. So the Jewish people saw they did not live in a vacuum. They did not live in a bubble. And they saw what's happening in Europe, that the French want to be French, and the German wants to be German, and the Italian want to be Italian. And there were a lot of countries that were going through unification and so on. So this concept, we call it Zionism, but it has a strong component of nationalism, which is also attached with the land. The next mini series that we're going to do after we learn everything and understand everything and make sense of everything related to the conflict and come up with a peace solution. I'm counting on you. We're going to talk about I will, and whoever will come. The next topic will be the state of Israel and the Jewish world. And we're going to try to understand what happened to the Jewish people that we live all over the world. And the French Revolution had a very big piece of it. Part of it is emancipation and nationalism. So this line that we were drawing, this brought us all the way to the Jewish nationalism. I do want to say in the parallel line, and then we're going to deal with the name and the people, that there was this nationalism sentiment for the Arab-speaking people, or the Arab culture. And that started more or less at the same time, a little bit later. We're talking about the early 20th century. And I even brought a few examples of scholars or of the Herzls, sort of the Arab world, that talk about these ideas of nationalism and later on independence for the Arab world in general, not necessarily connected to a particular piece of land, but just sort of as a concept that we also deserve to fight for our own national identity. And I'll share this with you and you'll be able to look it through at home. And there was even a Congress, an Arab Congress. There were actually a few Arab Congresses. The first one was in 1913. So it's about 15 years after the first Zionist Congress. And there are a lot of similar sort of lines. And again, it's because nobody lived in a bubble. This was the notion. This was where the wind was blowing in the world. So everybody kind of wanted to, jump on that. If we'll have time at the end, we'll go back and read this a little bit, and if not, we'll read it at home. Let's talk about the name, which is key, of course, to understand what we're talking about, okay? The name Palestine, or in Latin, Palestina, on one hand, it's an ancient name, and on one hand, it's a new name. What I want to say by that, pick a size, right? Choose a side. It does not appear in any of the scriptures. It's not in our Bible. It's not in the New Testament. And it's even not in the Quran. And that's important. There was not anything that was referred to as Palestine in ancient history of anybody. Not Jewish ancient history, not Muslim Jewish history, and not Christian Jewish history. It doesn't appear in any of our scripture. So what does appear? We have the name Pleshet. In Hebrew, we say Plishtim. Plishtim are the people that come from the land that is called Pleshet. Who can pronounce it correctly in English?
Philistines.
Thank you. So the Philistines were from Pleshet. And this is a nation that is mentioned many times in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, they were the enemies of our people. They were fighting with us all the time. By the way, they were also very successful. At a certain point, they owned 5 cities in the land of Israel, some of which exist until today. Kiryat Gat is one. Ashdod is another one. Ashkelon is another one. Gaza is another one. 5 cities on the shore. Why? Because they were merchants and they were coming from the sea. And we did not have a good relationship. David and Goliath. Goliath was Philistine. The first king of the Israelites was King
No.
Saul. What happened to him? Who did that? Okay. How is this related? The first time that the name Palestine or Palestina is associated with the same land that we've been talking about ever since Abraham and throughout is under the Roman rule. So if this is our ruler of history, it's approximately in the middle, right here. Or actually, it's in between here. It happens in the 2nd century. What happens in the 2nd century? In the 1st century, there was a gigantic war between the Jews and the Romans. At the climax of that war, the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and exiled all the Jewish people all over the world. This was our moment of destruction 2,000 years ago. Very, very few Jews remained in the land of Israel after that destruction. But those who did, about 60 years, 70 years later, had the chutzpah to try and fight the Romans again. And it's written in our history books as the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. And the Bar Kokhba Rebellion was fatal. And the Roman emperor that was the emperor during that rebellion, whose name was Hadrian, said, that's it. They didn't get it the first time. We're done with them. Them is, of course, us. And he did a series of things following up on making sure that the Jews and the land of Israel altogether are done. The first thing that he does, he changes all the names of everything. And the first name that was changed is the name of the land that we are so connected to for already, even then, 2,000 years. And Hadrian makes it very clear, he writes it on all the maps and in all the history books, that from now on, under the rule of the Roman Empire, it is no longer to be called and known to the world as the land of Israel, but as Syria, Palestina. Why? Because the area north of it was called Syria and it was also under the Roman rule. So we don't want to reinvent everything. We're just going to combine it together. And why Palestina? Because Palestina resembles the Philistines. And the Philistines were the enemies of the Jews. And they also killed them. And we, the Romans, want to resemble this rule nation from the biblical time that the Jews are very much familiar with. So we're going to name the land supposedly after them. The next thing that he did, he said, Jerusalem, forget about it. No more Jerusalem. He builds a new Roman city, a pagan city with huge statues of the Roman gods all over the city. And what is the name of that city from that point on? Ilia Capitolina. If you were living in the world in the 2nd, 3rd century, and also the 4th and the 5th, you would travel the world and you would say that you're from Jerusalem. Nobody will know where you're from. It was not called Jerusalem. It was called with a Roman name, Ilia Capitolina. Later on, they looked at the entire map and they divided it to several sections. So to make it easy on themselves, they call it Palestina. Yeah, Prima, Seconda, Terza. In each of the areas, they had a governor who was in charge of collecting taxes and ruling and doing all of that. For 2,000 years, the entire world, besides us, refers to the land as Palestine, when it was just a Roman invention created out of rage to the Jewish people that decided with their chutzpah to rebel the Romans again. And in all the history books, in all the travel books, in all the pilgrims that went to visit for 2,000 years, and particularly under the Ottoman rule, it was called the Ottoman Palestine. And of course, when the Brits are coming, we're going to talk about them next time, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapses, they also call it the British Palestine. But who never called it Palestine? Who never called it Palestine? We did, never did. For us, it was forever, was, is, will be Israel. But this is where the name is coming from. But of course, the most important question is not where the name is coming from, but the people. And this will be the last statement I'm going to make today. And with this, we were going to go and struggle, because this is not easy to comprehend. Well, maybe it's easy to comprehend, but it's not easy to swallow, that's for sure. And this is, by the way, important for us to understand the most. So when we go and have conversations with everybody else in the world that really have no clue, this is the real education. And this is the fact. For 2,000 years, all the people who lived in the land of Israel, which was called Palestine, they were called Palestinians. Because always in history, you call the people that live in a particular land with the name of the land that they're living, right? Germans in Germany, Italians in Italy, Americans in America, Palestinians in Palestine. You remember we said the Jewish people always lived in the land of Israel / now we can say Palestine. So the Jewish people that lived in Palestine, they were called Palestinians. Absolutely. Because the world called them Palestine, and the reference was for the Christians and for the Jews and for the Muslims. Soon, Michael, you will understand why I was insisting on calling it Arab-speaking minorities. Because Arab-speaking minorities were all kinds of different people, and all of them, for 2,000 years, by the world, were called Palestinians. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't mean that they belong to one particular ethnic or religious group. It only meant that this is the people that live in this particular territory. In fact, the Arab-speaking minorities, those Bedouins, the Druze, and so on, they themselves did not call themselves as Palestinians. they actually identified themselves by their religious group, which was either Christian or Muslims mainly, or something else. At the end of the 19th century, a new fashion started to come along to identify myself by the family that I am belonging to. So, for example, in Jerusalem, there were two sort of wealthy, dominant families, Arab-speaking families. They were not calling themselves Palestinians, although they were living in Palestine. They were calling themselves the Husseinis and the Nashashibis. Or sometimes they refer to themselves as Jerusalemites. But they did not refer to themselves as Palestinians. When people start calling themselves as Palestinians, notice over here that leading up to Israel's independence in 1948, it was common for the international press to label Jews, not Arabs, Jews living in Palestine as Palestinians. And the first time that we hear anything remotely resembling to something that is called Palestinian people or Palestinian unity or Palestinian independence is when? It's about 100 years ago. Now I want to make something very, very clear. One of my biggest heroes in Jewish history is Golda Meir. I love her, and I can talk about her for hours. One thing that she said, I will never agree with. You know what was it? It will never work. Golda Meir said that there is no such thing as the Palestinian people. She was a very intelligent woman. So does many other people in the world that can come and look at the history, and you can find it in many different books. I'm happy to send you the links. And they will say, the first time we hear about Palestinian people or about any idea about Palestinian unity, independence, nationalism, or anything, it's 100 years ago. Does that mean, I'm asking, we're not going to have a discussion now, but we're going to go home with that. Does that mean that there is no Palestinian people? And I want to end by saying that at the end of the 19th century, the land was called Palestine. So there was a Palestinian newspaper, Palestinian Post, that later became Jerusalem Post. And there was a Palestinian Symphonic Orchestra, which later became the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. And I know people whose grandparents were born in Palestine, and it says on their birth certificate, born in Palestine, and they are Jewish. And at the same time, the Palestinian people, the way we understand it today, is a new phenomena of 100 years. In 1920, for the first time, we see somebody who refers to himself as a Palestinian leader. It was a revolution. It's nothing like anybody in the world have ever witnessed. His name was Musa Kazim al-Husseini from one of those two families, who said out loud in public in an Arab-speaking Congress, we must defend Palestine. Who is we? And where is this Palestine that we must defend? We're going to explore, because this is only session number 1. And just sort of to end on a poetic note, Yehuda Amichai is one of the greatest poets of the Israeli culture. And he says like this: from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, like a plow. And the whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. For about 150 years, there are two people on one land, call it a different name, but refer to the exact same land, who are trying to prove each other and the world that they are right. And all that was known to those two people for the last 150 years is war. And we're gonna unfold it, I promise you. We'll open up the maps and we'll talk about the numbers and we'll talk about who said yes to which deal and who said no to which deal. But also I want you to remember, Mahmoud Darwish is one of the national Palestinian poets. By the way, they lived pretty much at the same time, Yehuda Amichai and Mahmoud Darwish. And he said, the war will end. The leaders will shake hands. The old woman will keep waiting for her martyred son. The girl will wait for her beloved husband. And those children will wait for their heroic father. I don't know who sold their homeland, but I know who paid the price. So let us go home with that. And anybody who wants to stay and chat, I'm here. Next week, we're gonna all meet on Zoom. Same time, same link, but I do want to just ask a question so we'll get prepared. The following week is November 22nd, which is a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We have, I guess, 3 options. And you will tell me because I never did Thanksgiving. It will be my first one. And I'm not cooking for it, so. One option is to do what we did today. And those who want to come here will come here. Those who want to be on Zoom will be on Zoom. Second option is just to have it all on Zoom. And the third option is not to do it on that week. And then we'll either skip or we'll push.
The question would be is if you're gonna record it.
What?
If you would record it.
Yes, I have no problem recording it, but I also would like to know how many people will come because.
Why
yeah.
not do it the Tuesday?
Why not do it the Tuesday?
Well,
I don't remember. But.
I say so, yeah.
What?
Well,
Keep it.
Yeah, a lot of people have kids coming home that week and
Yeah,
I
we're
put kids
traveling.
home this week.
Beautiful. All right. So then we will meet next week on Zoom. And 2 weeks afterwards, we're also gonna meet on Zoom. And after that, we're gonna do hybrid.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
What? If it will be recorded?
Yeah, for next week.
Yeah, we'll record it.
Wow. Thank you.
Yes.